Do you have to manually say it goes live?
It is scheduled, but I've hit live and we're now live. So,
fair enough.
It takes a few minutes, I think, for people to get on board. Like they'll get notification on Periscope, but so we are live anyway. What I'll do is I'll just break into my usual spiel and welcome everybody. Thank you for everybody joining us, and welcome to the virtual meetup. My name is Elliot Richmond, and I'm one of the organisers of the usual WordPress meetup in Cheltenham, which is our banner there. You can't see Cheltenham just up there. But obviously we're in the virtual world at the moment, so we're trying to broadcast to people through StreamYard. So, and I have my usual co-hosts, Ronald, Richard, and Stillman. If you want to say hi, introduce yourselves and whatever you want to do. And we've also got two speakers tonight for everybody. Sabrina, and I'm really sorry if I pronounce this wrong, but is it Zidane or Zidane?
No worries, it's Zidane.
Zidane, okay. I was close. Yeah. And we we also have Jeremy Onion, who is also our other speaker, and I'll come on to those shortly. But if you want to just go around the room and just say hello and introduce yourselves, you're more than welcome to. So if we go clockwise and start with you, Sabrina.
Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Sabrina. I'm from Kiev, Ukraine. I do website performance optimization work for clients. I worked for WP Rocket, and I also have my own plugin in repo that tests site speed. And when I'm not coding, I think, and when I'm not locked at home, I do swimming.
Wonderful, thank you very much.
My name is Jeremy. I'm the technical director at an agency based in Oxford. I've been a developer for longer than I care to remember, and been using WordPress for the past 4 or so years, obviously at the agency where I work. So I'm very pleased to be here tonight to be able to hopefully impart some knowledge to everybody. Excellent.
Well, you're most welcome, and thank you for joining us. And then if we go down this way to Ronald.
Hi, my name is Ronald. So one of the co-hosts from, it's been a few years now. I also work for the YIF, where we specialize in WooCommerce plugins, all sorts of plugins. And and I've got a bit of news, which is also WooCommerce related in a short while. Rich. Cool. Oh, that's confusing.
That way. I am Rich. I am co-director of a small design and web development studio in Cheltenham. So we do design and web. WordPress I have been using for about 10 years now, and helping run the Cheltenham Meetup in person and out of person, so to speak. Apart from that, not a lot else to say, I don't think. So I'm going to pass the baton to Stillman.
Hello, my name is Stillman. I am down in Slimbridge, where if you know anything about birds, you'll know about the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust. But I have nothing to do with birds. Instead, I garden and work on WordPress. And Elliot knows how much I struggle with WordPress because I keep asking him questions.
And you're more than welcome to ask questions.
Normally, I put out the chairs for the meetup, but I'm surplus to requirements, so I'm just sitting here enjoying Sabrina and Jeremy's talks tonight.
Excellent. Yeah, wow, Slimbridge. Is that what? So is there a certain time of year when the birds migrate and stuff?
Birds migrate in the autumn and the spring. Some are resident all year round. If you are interested in the wildfowl life, any time is good to come. But if you're a bird watcher, you want to come in the spring when all the birds are migrating.
Excellent.
Well, coming back to Kiev, and some coming from Kiev in the autumn.
There you go. Small world, huh?
Possibly.
Excellent. Well, like I said, we've got two speakers this evening. Sabrina Zidane, who'll be talking about the recommendations on how to speed up your website that won't work. And then we'll have Jeremy Onion, who will be talking about, oh God, I have my notes here. Scaling up with using AWS for hosting.
Yeah, using Bedrock and AWS hosting, scaling.
Yeah, that's right. Apologies for that. I did have that note somewhere, but it seems to have disappeared into the ether. Like I said, sometimes things do go wrong, but we try not to let them go wrong, but they do. So apologies about that. But first of all, what I wanted to do was just as a little section before we break into our speakers, is just to go around the room, and if anybody's got some little gems that they want to share with people. I've been on a bit of a Gutenberg journey over the last few months and developing native blocks, which has been an experience in itself. But on that journey, I've discovered a few things that I think might be worth sharing with everybody else, if they're interested, whether it's your user or a developer, because it comes from both angles. So I'm just going to I'm just going to drop everybody out and do a little bit of a spiel, and then we can talk about it afterwards. So just bear with me a second. So that is my screen. It doesn't seem to be looking too good. Let me come back to that one. Actually, let me drop that out and bring it back in, because that's... See, like I said, anything that could go wrong does go wrong. Can everyone see that? Is that like skew width? Is that skew width? Jeremy, is that skew width?
It looks like on the left-hand side of the screen, there's some issues. Reminds me of the old Windows 3.1.1 when you used to get the mouse just drawing itself all over the place. That's looking a bit.
Something's crashed. Let me remove that and try again. There you go.
Yeah.
Right, let's try again. There we go. Let me just drop you out. Okay, so there is a thing coming to Gutenberg called the block directory, and it's going to be part of the WordPress user interface. And it's going to act a little bit like plugins, like the plugin repository, but I think it was due to be released in 5.3, but it's been a bit delayed. But I basically found this UI, which looks really interesting. So when you're adding blocks to your content, you'll be able to, this will kind of be a little bit the journey. This is a little bit old. I think this was created last year, but it gives you a bit of a feel for the way it's going to look. So as you add blocks, you'll be able to search for the internal blocks that you've already got, but you'll also be able to search the native repository, and you'll get things that pop up like sliders. So you can then select those sliders, and then as if you were going through the user journey, you can add these items and publish. And I think on publish, what happens is the block plugin gets added to your WordPress site, and then you can then use that block plugin. So they're small design components, and that's just a little bit of a taste of what's to come, really. So that's the block directory. The other thing I wanted to show people was and my screen's gone a bit pear-shaped again. See if I can bring that back. No. There we go. So the other thing I wanted to share, which is quite useful, I think. No, that's gone again. Let me just do the old traditional. No. Why isn't this working? Let's see if I can. There it comes back. Okay. So this is a block plugin. called Layout Grid Block, which I discovered recently by watching WordCamp Europe. And it's an experimental block. And it's gone a bit weird again. Anyway, I'll just leave it on the screen there. So it's an experimental block, but it's been built by Automatic, and it's obviously going to have quality built into it. So it's a neat little arsenal to add to your or tool to add to your arsenal if you're building layouts and websites and stuff. You can drop in, unlike columns, you can adjust the grid widths, and it's also responsive friendly, and you can adjust columns or grids so you can span maybe 4 items or 4 columns, and then you can change the balance of those, like make 1 column spread over 1 span or 3, and you can just play around, be a bit more creative with your column designs. It's also, like I said, it's responsive, so you can change how it looks on desktop and mobile device, which is really handy. And if I could show you these little images, I would, but they're not working. But anyway, that is the Layout Grid Block by Automatic. Definitely recommend giving that a whirl. Have a look at that if you're playing with layouts, or you want to be creative with layouts with blocks. The other one I wanted to show you see if I just refresh that. No, that ain't working, is it? Oh, that's a little bit better. So this is a website called Gutenberg Hub, and it's a resource for users as well as developers. So if you're interested in using blocks or anything like that, I highly recommend checking this site out, because from a user's perspective, it will give you little tips and tricks on how to actually use blocks on your website. And as a developer, there's a big resource for guides, links to the handbook if you're heavily into development, and also a resource for tutorials and stuff like that. So the other really interesting thing about this site is it has got like a block directory, which is going to be the similar thing to the way WordPress does it, but I'm assuming that this will be I'm assuming that the blocks that are associated with this site but they have some sort of affiliation. So unlike the block directory, which will have quality control through the repository via WordPress, it will operate in a similar way, but it's still a useful resource if you're looking for blocks to do specific things. So if you want to look for a slider or a price table or anything like that. So that's one aspect of this site. The other really interesting aspect or element of this site is, and I wish it would bloom in work because you just can't see it. The section on this site is something called template library, which is quite interesting because if you're building websites and you want to quickly spin up some layouts, you can come to the template library, and you can pick any one of these design patterns. So if you're looking for like testimonial pages or pricing table pages, content, you've got this whole range of groups of blocks that you can cherry pick from. And literally, if you like something or you like the look of something, a particular layout, you can just pop into that page and you can click this button called copy code. It's not actually copying code, it's copying the group of blocks that you need. So say, for instance, if you wanted to choose that layout, you can literally copy that code, pop over to your own website. This is a 2019 theme, I think. And you can literally go ahead and paste. What that does is it drops in that whole group of blocks to create that layout. So again, it's another really useful resource if you're building websites regularly and you want to just build something out really quickly. So all of these blocks in here are made up of the native blocks that come with WordPress out of the box. And it's just it's a useful gem that I thought I would share. And it's the kind of little things that I've been discovering on my little Gutenberg journey, really. And that was about it, really. That's what I wanted to share with everybody. So let me just take that screen off, come back. Open to discussion. Is anybody use blocks or?
I've tried, but it's not easy to use the blocks if you're composing online or on your site, because it's a bit cack-handed for me, but that's just me.
Do you prefer kind of the classic editor then? Is that what you're saying?
Classic editor, or usually I work in HTML and pop everything in. But I'm an old fellow, and it's just the way I was brought up.
No, I can see what you're saying.
I think it's starting to become interesting with Gutenberg. I'm quite used now to the using it within blocks and the simple things out of the box. But one of the things is it's being incorporated at the moment still as a separate plugin in WooCommerce, and I could just see that evolving into making your store a lot easier to manage and design out of the box without having to use certain themes or special code. So it's and just what Elliot's shown me as well. It's it's becoming interesting now. It's sort of really speeding up quite the boring or tasks, and you have something ready to go and play with it.
Oh, I agree. It's easy to get things up and running very quickly, but it's for someone who's worked in another way, it's a little bit cack-handed. That means difficult, Sabrina. Sorry.
I think Stillman said something interesting. It is a little bit clunky, clumsy, and yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Which is why the template library that I showed you earlier is really useful tool if you want to just pick up a layout. Because I think if you stumble across something, it's hard to stumble across something, but that's kind of what happens when you're dealing with layouts. You go like, well, let's chuck this in, let's chuck that in, see what happens, and then it starts to get clumsy and pear-shaped, and you just want to get rid of it. With that template library resource, you can just see what you're going to get, and you copy it over, and then you dump it in your page, and you can study what's going on. But I think in the early days as well, the user experience was really bad. But it is, like Ronald says, it's starting to get better. Some
of the page builders like Elementor and Beaver Builder and the rest, they've been doing this for maybe years. Maybe that's an overestimation, but they've been doing it for quite some time. And you can move layouts, or what do you call them, blocks or so. I think you can move them from side to side. You have separate plugins doing exactly the same. So they're sort of playing catch up, but they've still got a long way to go to match some of the user experience that some of the more popular page builders have created in recent years.
Yeah, I think if you get into that Elementor debate, I mean, there are a few sort of options out there for page builders, but yeah, Elementor seems to be like the market leader. I think it's probably one of the better ones, and it's definitely, maybe it's the benchmark for where Gutenberg needs to go. But I think they're definitely on different journeys.
Yeah. But they certain elements of Elementor, they're doing them really right. So it's, but yeah, I know it's a completely different debate. Page builder versus Gutenberg. I didn't want to start it off, that's for sure.
Yes. Sorry.
Go on, Sabrina.
Just speaking about old school and markup, there is a project called Iceberg. If you heard about that, I can show it if you could share my screen, Elliot. So this, that's it. This is a project called Iceberg that works on top of the Gutenberg, and it uses markup. and it takes everything away. So you can just write here and use markup like in old way and do things like in early days. Does it make sense?
Is that HTML markup or is that Markdown markup?
Yeah, markup, the one that we use everywhere on WordCamp websites and so on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Iceberg. That's another useful one to check that out. I'll check that out.
Mm.
There was a question from Red Fox New Media. Are these blocks shortcode based? The ones that I copied into the page, they are literally groups of blocks. So if I just take your screen out there, there is a block for shortcode. So yeah, they're not shortcode based as such. They are literally small components. So if you haven't used them, it's difficult to explain. If you haven't used them in the back end, then go away and have a play with them. But hopefully that's answered your question. So yeah, any more discussion on that? I don't want to dwell on something that's going to be boring if it's not useful.
We're just starting to actually use Gutenberg in Angular ourselves now because we feel it's kind of getting to the point where we can do. And I think one of the key things we're finding is it works really well if your designs are built in a very component-based manner. So a lot of the stuff we do is very much based on being able to drop components in on various points and various pages. And so we find that Gutenberg actually is starting to lend itself quite well to doing that. Whereas some other, if you've got more art director type pieces, then it's very difficult to do that in any kind of grid system. So I think a lot of it will be based on what you're trying to achieve and the sort of design you've got as to whether you're going to get any mileage out of it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that actually. My journey recently has been to retrofit an old site, but in blocks, and it's completely the wrong thing to do. It's just been horrible.
Yeah.
But going through that journey, what I realised, and having discussions in the UK WP community Slack group, is that what you really need to do is to look at what you've got on your page already, if it's a retro thing, and see what you can start building as base components, and then use some internal components. And you actually end up only needing a tiny little block that just does one tiny little thing that can be an inner block. And you can kind of, but what I was doing was going, right, looking at the page, the markup, extracting that, and then trying to build a block, which was like, and it was doing that. What I learned from that is that there's no point getting a block to do multiple different things. You need to look at a block to do a single pattern, and that's it. That's the way you need to think about it. But yeah, retrofitting and going back, that's just the wrong way around of doing it. I think that's kind of like what you were explaining as well there, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Perhaps you need to think of, in terms of language, that the blocks are elements, and each HTML element is going to fit into a block.
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely that
language.
Yeah, there's definitely a dialogue, and once you get your head around that as well, that I mean, that's a different thing. When you start talking, it's Gutenberg, and then it's blocks, and then it's components and design patterns. I think that's inherent with any web development or any framework you use. It's if you move from WordPress to Drupal, say for instance, it's a completely different language. Although there's lots of similarities. That's my kind of analogy of it anyway.
Yeah, different names for the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, Ronald, did you have something you wanted to share with everybody?
Yes. From today was the first restart of the WooCommerce London Meetup. I'm one of the co-hosts together with Lisa. And every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, we have 1 hour of Woo. It's advertised on Meetup as well. And it's a really easy format. We just sort of join in. It's small conversation. There's a bit of a format where we have a bit of news and share a skill, and this can be from anybody within the community. and something to showcase, questions and then announcements, and that's sort of your hour done. So it's a lunchtime thing. Grab a coffee. And so today we discussed a couple of things, and the input by the attendees was interesting, and it was very much Gutenberg again, because WooCommerce 4.3 is in beta, so it's ready to be tested, and there is more emphasis on Gutenberg blocks for WooCommerce, as I sort of mentioned earlier, and so we decided to give that a go on Wednesday, do a bit of a demo, try it, let other people join in and give some feedback. But also it's an opportunity for us to shape what it looks like, what's missing, what are the key features, because sort of part of this WooCommerce community, you have a lot of say within it. So I think it's not so much an invitation, but if you know somebody who's interested, I think it's well worth to join in. We are looking actually for somebody to give a bit of a demo on that as well. And also another thing that caught my eye, based on all this research, was I don't know if you know Bob WP from Doodoo. He's doing a podcast, and he had Matt Mullenweg on as an interviewing him, and I thought it was a really interesting interview because it's very much WooCommerce focused, and of course it's something I'm very much interested in. And they talked a lot about sort of competition between Shopify and WooCommerce, and how each sort of can learn from each other, but yet again it's also a bit of a competition, and so it's well worth to listen back to it. And it's a complete new discussion on that, on Shopify, how well they're doing and how different it actually is. But as a user, as a startup, you can see why people might favor one over the other. And I had one more thing that I wanted to, and I think that's it. Yeah, I mentioned the Gutenberg blog. So every Wednesday, 1 o'clock, join in.
Is that weekly?
Yes.
Okay, so is it like an online format at the moment?
Yeah, it's a Zoom room. At the moment, of course, it's not. It's only, I think it was 8 or 9 of us today. As a first one, I thought that was a good one. And
I'd be interested in joining that, definitely. Is it so? It's Wednesday, every Wednesday, 1 o'clock.
Every Wednesday, 1 o'clock. Yeah.
Cool.
An hour of wood.
Yeah.
Where'd you get the Zoom link from? Where'd you share it? If somebody wants to join.
Yeah, so it's through Meetup, so you RSVP, and then you get the link.
Okay.
And the password. And the key.
So what is it? WooCommerce London on Meetup, something like that?
Yeah. London WooCommerce or WooCommerce London?
See if I can find it now.
If you find it, Rich, pop it in chat and I'll
let
me share it. Well, that's great, Ronald. That's good that you're getting involved with the community. So when does that mean when we go back into, we all get released back into the community? Does that mean you're going to have to go to London every Wednesday?
No, I think we probably will continue doing the lunchtime online virtual one, because it's good fun. It's about sharing knowledge and helping each other out. It's not full on presentation or a slick production. But yeah, eventually when we are back into the community, we will do I don't think it will be monthly, maybe a bi-monthly, sort of 6-7 times a year, where we have a meetup with speakers and swag.
Cool. Yeah, I think with this whole situation that we're in, I think there's been a lot of things that have happened with online meetups and just get-togethers. I think Dan maybe does a weekly chat as well, I think, which is a daily meetup. Not daily, I can't remember. Somebody might be able to remind us, but I think it happens like once a week, which is just another get together for an hour. It's kind of like a meetup at a date in the daytime. But now you've mentioned that, actually, I did have this thought, and I think this evening's presentations, what's really great about this is the fact that we've got Sabrina with us, who's basically in Europe somewhere, which is like 2 hours away, or there's 2 hour time zone difference. I don't see why we couldn't apply this to like a normal meetup and just stream presenters on the night, which basically opens us up to get more information and better speakers. Well, not better speakers, that's the wrong thing to say, but it gives us more flexibility in giving speakers the opportunity, and also giving users information as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting when we do go back to normal, how that pans out. I must add that you need good Wi-Fi. In our current venue, we don't have good Wi-Fi, so that might be a good reason to move. I don't know. Anyway.
Or just hardwire it in.
Hardwire it, yeah. Yeah, we need an expert to do that, though. That's a bit out of my expertise. Right, okay, so I'll just pop that up there. So for anybody interested, that was, yeah, I think Hannah's agreeing with us now. And I think we are lucky to have, I think I saw you speak in London, actually, for the first time, London WordCamp.
This year or last year?
2019, I think it was.
Okay, it was about speed then as well.
I don't think we didn't have one this year, did we? It got.
No.
I mean,
it was gonna,
yeah.
yeah.
It seems like 2019 never ended, right?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So for anybody that's interested in the London Woo meetup, that's the link there along the bottom. So I'll definitely make a note of that and probably join you at some point, Ronald.
That would be lovely. We haven't scheduled the next one yet, but we're getting into a routine. Today was all about the test, how it all works, and so far so good.
Cool. Right, okay, well, we're coming to 6:30, our first presentation. So what I'm going to do is drop everybody out. If nobody else has got anything to add to that, we can come back. Yeah, cool. And we'll get Sabrina on her way with her presentation, sorry.
Okay.
But before we do that, Sabrina, there's a little section of the show that we usually do, which is basically a quick fire, this and that round. And basically what I do is fire some questions at you, and it's really for us to get to know you a little bit better. And they are literally a couple of options. You say the first thing that comes off the top of your head, you choose one or the other, and that helps us to get to know you. So you ready?
Okay, all right. I wasn't prepared for this.
We never are. We always like to surprise our guests. So first question is Page Builder or Gutenberg?
I never used page builders. Gutenberg.
So, Gutenberg. Reach for a plugin or build from scratch?
Build from scratch.
Big party or small gathering?
Big party.
Yay. Swimming or running?
Swimming.
And final question, pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Pizza, what is the question?
Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Yeah, I'm saying pizza. It's not a question.
Oh.
Of course.
Well, it is.
Pizza.
Well, does pineapple belong on pizza, yes or no?
No.
No. Yeah, good. Yeah, that always splits the room, but yeah, so you're saying pineapple doesn't belong on pizza?
Of course no.
Excellent. We're singing from the same song sheet there. Okay, so that helps us get to know you a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take myself off the screen, hand it over to you, and let you introduce yourself. And thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're more than welcome.
Now I cannot get this big party with pizza out of my head. I'm thinking about WordCamp Europe next year or something. It should be fun. So my name is Sabrina. I'm going to share my screen. I'm doing speed optimization work for clients. I've been doing this full-time for the last 2 years. I also worked for WP Rocket. I'm WordPress multi-site big enthusiast. And today I want to share what I think 5 most popular recommendations to speed up your website that don't work. So if you ever Google something like how to speed my website, you probably notice that on different websites there are like similar advices repeated over and over again without really explaining why you should apply them and what they mean. And I just picked 5 of them. The 5 that I was able to observe not to be working in very many cases. And I'm going to share them with you. So first, from 5 to 3rd, 5th, 4th, and 3rd. I combine them because they're going all together. So reduce the number of requests on your website, disable unused plugins, and combine requests. If you Google something like how to reduce the number of requests, the most, oh no, first I should say where the requests come from. So they are coming from your, first of all, they're coming from WordPress. WordPress is doing something, then you install and activate your theme and you customize it. So some requests are coming from there or from page builders, so from your theme, and other requests are coming from plugins that you use, and they might be using some third parties to provide some additional functionality. So there are 3 basic ways how requests get there at all: WordPress, your theme, and plugins. And so usually those requests that are not coming from your theme and from WordPress core, they are used for social sharing buttons, for chat widgets, comment systems like this, for videos from YouTube and Vimeo, for Google Analytics or other sorts of analytics, for ads. I ran out of the space here, but you can complete this list with a whole bunch of other options like CDNs, scripting tests, testing scripts, some other scripts, anything you can imagine. So if you ask Google how to reduce the number of requests on your website, like very usual advice will be, first of all, prevent WordPress core from doing additional requests. I'm sure you've seen this before, like prevent WordPress from sending pinbacks or trackbacks or doing some other sorts of things, for example, disable emojis or gravatar or something like that. The second the second recommendation, very popular, will be to combine requests. And the third will be to disable unused plugins. So in our usual way of doing things, after this, you're trying to do what you were advised, right? So to prevent WordPress core from doing additional requests, you're Googling for some plugin or a bit of code that you can insert into your functions PHP, and prevent WordPress doing these additional few requests like this. To combine requests, you're Googling for plugin usually. It can be Auto-Optimize, it can be WP-Rocket, or many other plugins that do this. That will do, you just check the checkbox and plugin will combine requests for you. And then you are going through your plugin list and you find plugins that can be disabled without breaking the functionality of your website, and you disable them. But what happens next? And your request count might get a little bit lower, and even page speed score at this point can get a little bit better. But if you check your loading times, like real loading times, not rates, but loading times in milliseconds, you might find out it didn't change that much or didn't change at all. And so the actual time that user has to wait before he can start interacting with your website didn't change, and his user experience didn't change. So your conversion rate wasn't improved, your chances to get high in Google rankings didn't improve. Why did that happen? First of all, when this first recommendation, prevent WordPress core from doing additional requests. If it was if it was that main thing that makes your WordPress slow, then why when you install fresh WordPress, it's fast, even without those requests? And it gets slower and slower while you're using it, right? So you can, obviously, you can do that, but it won't change much. The second thing, combining requests. This was a thing that could help you like 5-6 years ago, when hosting companies were using servers that were using HTTP1 protocol to serve websites. Now, I can imagine any decent hosting company using HTTP1 for that. They all are using HTTP2 protocol on their servers, which means that their servers can do multiplexing and can prioritize the order of loading scripts. So when you combine, not scripts, but all assets. So when you combine your CSS into one file and you combine your JavaScript, all JavaScript files into one file, it doesn't change anything. Instead, it usually causes problems with layouts. Something can be broken, like image galleries, sliders, something else, when they're combined. But you can try and check this out. Very, very rarely it can help, just a little bit. But in most cases, there is no need in combining your CSS and JavaScript in the single file. And the next one, to disable unused plugins. While it's obviously good to have everything clean and tidy and not to have plugins that you are not using, usually the plugins that you can easily disable, they don't do anything on the front end. For example, you're going through your plugins list, and plugins that you can disable, it can be what? For example, export-import plugin that you can disable and then enable when you need them, right? But those kind of plugins, they don't do anything, don't do much on front end, and they don't slow down it anyways. What kind of plugin also? For example, if you've heard better search replace or search replace in database, for example, when you change to another domain name, you can use this plugin to search and replace in your database from your WordPress admin. You can decide to disable a plugin like this because it's not in use every day. But you cannot just go in your plugin list and disable something that is really in use on your website. You can't disable those chat widgets. You cannot disable analytics scripts or forms or everything that is in use on your website. You gotta keep them, right? So when you did all this, you prevented WordPress core from doing additional requests, you combined requests, and you disabled unused plugin, you may find out that nothing really changed. And yeah, that's what I said. Give me a second. Nothing changed. But also, for example, you are looking to reduce, you are determined to reduce the number of requests by substituting one plugin with another. For example, you learned that for example, chat widget plugin makes fewer requests than another, or some form plugin makes fewer requests than another, and you're determined to switch to another one. The thing is that the number of requests is not exactly what impacts your site speed. Let's take a look at these two websites. So I took two websites. Let's have a look at this one first. This is very regular, like very usual website. It's not super lean. It's not very heavy. It's like average. So here we can see there are a number of requests. The number of requests is 184, and the page size is 1 megabyte and a half, 1.5, right? But if you check out the numbers that this site gets on mobile, the largest contentful page, if you can see this, is 7 seconds. It means that when you enter the website address on your phone and press enter, you need to wait for 7 seconds until you see the largest element on this page. On this exact page, the largest element is this image. This largest contentful paint, it can be the slider or gallery or a big block of text. In this example, it's image. So before user can see this large image, he has to wait for 7 seconds. And before he can see anything at all, this is called first contentful paint, he has to wait for 4.9 seconds, almost for 5 seconds, nothing is happening at all. And if you look over here, this is the process how this site is loading. So you can see that for quite a while, user is seeing nothing but a blank screen. And then he can see something, and then a little bit of something else. So let's have a look at another site. Just remember these numbers. It's 184 requests and 1.5 megabytes of weight of page size. And there is another website, BuzzFeed.com. You probably know this. It's a super popular website. It looks like it's very heavy. That's it. You see like tones of images and content, and the page looks like endless. So it has 232 requests, and it rates 2 megabytes and 99 kilobytes. So here's a comparison, right? Much more requests, 25% more in page weight, but take a look at these numbers. I hope you can see this. All right. So largest contentful page, you would expect that this website would be loading slower than the previous one. But in fact, something different is happening here. It loads, the largest contentful page is almost twice better. And first contentful paint is just 1 and 9 seconds, which is not bad for mobile. And here it's 4 and 0.9. And also, if you take a look over here, the process of loading, you can see that once the enter was pressed, like the go button was pressed, user can see the pretty large amount of content from this website on his screen. This is the separate topic why it happens, that how Google measures these numbers, first contentful paint and largest contentful paint, they are not measured properly all the times. That's why we can see that, in fact, this website loads faster than it says in stats, in numbers. So once he presses go to this website, he almost instantly can see this first screen. While on this side, he's seeing blank screen for quite long time, and then it's half built. So what is the point here? Here is the comparison. The thing is that the main question is not how many requests. It's all right. It's very nice to have a slow amount of requests, especially if you a developer and it's a personal website. You can do there whatever you want. You can just place there one small picture of yourself, a few lines of code, and it will be loading instantly. But if it's a news portal, or it's a WooCommerce store, or it's some SaaS platform, you cannot just easily take and cut off all the requests and just disable plugins and stuff. So what we can do about that? The thing is that it's not about the number of requests, but the way they are loading, the order in which they are loading. This is a waterfall chart which shows the order of loading of resources on this website, BuzzFeed. And if you're not familiar with this, don't feel puzzled. I'll explain. It's very easy. So this, if you can see this over here, I'm trying to point with my finger, but yeah, with mouse it will be better. So if you can see here, 1 second and a half, this is where DOM becomes interactive. So this happens when just 1 second and a half passed since the load started. And look, from those 200 and something requests, before this point, only 16 of the requests were loaded. All other requests from those 230 something, they were postponed to later. There are quite a few techniques to make this happen, but the aim of this to make a website usable and interactive instead of loading everything. So first you load the information that user needs to see and interact with in his viewport, like on first screen. And while he is already interacting with your website, you're loading everything else in background. For example, if you have some ads, I bet this BuzzFeed website has a lot of ads scripts. They are blocked by ad blocker here, 30 of them. But I bet like half of all their requests, they're coming from ads. So instead of loading these ad scripts with everything that they have on the page, they load the page content first, just few images first, a few lines of text to fit the screen, and then they load everything else. That's how they are able to make this largest contentful paint number score so low. And I think you've heard this, that just a month ago Google presented that this metrics, largest contentful paint, will be one of the Web Vital metrics that they will be using for ranking. So it's like super important to give the content to user as fast as possible, and only after he can interact with your website, load everything you want in the background. So this is about reducing the number of requests on your website. It's nice to have a low number of requests on your website, but it's not always possible. The better way you can go is to prioritizing the order they are loaded and making your website able to be used faster. So this is what we can do. The second not second, but it was 5. Give me a second. It was 5, 4th, and 3rd. Reduce the number of requests, disable unused plugins, and combine requests. 5th, so 5, 4, and 3rd. Second, very popular recommendation is to enable CDN. I'm wearing WordCamp Long Beach t-shirt today, and I was speaking at WordCamp Long Beach in September this year, and I met a friend there who is graphic designer from Los Angeles, and he asked me just recently, can you take a look at my website? It seems to get slower and slower. And I took a quick look, and I just asked him, can you just quickly disable your CDN, and we'll see what happens. So he disabled his CDN, and his website became faster. Like, it was a time to interactive, I think, was 8 seconds, and it became 5 seconds, like in no time, just by disabling CDN. Why this happened? So he is based in LA, right? And his clients are based in LA or somewhere very close to. He doesn't target on any clients outside of California. He meets his clients in person. Used to it before all this thing, but yeah, he's local graphic designer, and so it's super important for him to have his website loading fast for his clients who are also based in LA. For example, websites like BuzzFeed, they have users all over the world, but still they have the majority of users located somewhere. I also tested, Franca Manca, very nice pizza chain, very delicious pizza. So I tested their website. Let me show you this. I tested their website from 2 different locations. From London, obviously, they are serving clients in UK, so their target audience is in UK. I tested their site speed for 4G users in London, and also I tested their site speed for 4G users in California. And the results were quite different. In London, it was something 3.8 seconds, I think. Yeah, 3.8 seconds. And the same website, the same page, the same connection type, 4G. But for California, the results were 6.3. Like, it takes, which means that user experience for users coming from California is much, much worse. They have to wait for additional 2 seconds to load the website. But for this specific website, for Franco Manca's website, it doesn't matter. It means what matters that people from UK get the nice user experience, and if it costs to, like, it's better to have nice user experience for a target audience than to have fast loading, like average fast loading website everywhere in the world. So before enabling or disabling CDN, because the main aim of CDN is making your website equally fast from different parts of the world. So it will be loading equally or very similar in Australia and in Canada and in London. It will be pretty much the same. But if your target audience is located somewhere in the place that in some specific place or region, the CDN might make your website slower instead of making your website faster. If you're Franco Manca's pizza chain, you know that your target audience is in UK. But for example, if it's a website of SaaS products, for example, or WordPress plugin or theme, you have people coming from all over the world, right? But still, if you check where the majority of users are coming from, you may find out that the major part of users are coming from specific countries, or maybe not even major part of users, but major part of paying users are coming from specific countries. Just how can you check that out? You can use, there is a similar web Chrome extension that show you where users coming from. For example, BuzzFeed. So this is a very simple model of magazine. They are publishing content and they are making money with ads, right? So they target, their users can be from all over the world, but the majority of their users are coming from United States. So like a big chunk of their users, a half of their users are coming from the United States. So in their interest to make their websites loading very, very fast in the United States and not care so much, for example, for Australia, because, okay, it will take me to similar website. Anyways, they would like to target on this part of the world, even if it will mean that in Australia, their website will be a little bit slower. So using CDN won't always be beneficial for your website. It might be if you have really, really distributed audience, and if your server where your website is hosted is already very fast. But if, for example, you have fast server and your target audience is in UK, it's better not to enable CDN and just to stick to your fast server and serve the website directly from UK, because the distance between the physical server where your website lives and your target audience will be minimal at this, in this case, and the website will be delivered faster. And the next one, very popular, is to change, the last one, I mean, is to change web host and upgrade your hosting plan. This is very usual when someone comes to speed optimization group and says, look, my host so-and-so, they are so terribly slow. And there are always, no matter which host is that, there are always people who will say, oh, I'm using their services and they are quite fast for me. Why this happens? Because in most of the cases, you don't need to upgrade your hosting plan and you don't need to change web host. And it's not about them, it's about you and about your WordPress site and plugins that you use and everything that's happening there. What you can do to check this out? not exactly, but to give at least some overview of what's happening, there is a service called BuyCheck. You can go and test your website there to see how long it takes to load. Like, it checks time to first byte, right? But time to first byte includes several steps. It includes, first of all, domain name resolving, then connection, then SSL, then sending, waiting, and receiving. So this service can help you to check if your name servers are fast and if your SSL certificate servers is fast. But this waiting time, which can be long on many websites, it doesn't show anything. I will just skip this part for now, but take a look at this. So there is DNS. First of all, if your DNS, in this example, DNS takes short time to load. It's BuzzFeed. They have like very nice numbers here, just 144 milliseconds to go through the whole process is very fast. So if you tested your website and you notice that the main DNS, domain name servers, take long time to resolve, that doesn't mean that your hosting is slow. First of all, your domain name servers can be hosted elsewhere. You buy your domain from one company and then you host your website at another company. It's a very usual thing. So you can just find out here if it's a problem, and if it is, you need to figure out where they are hosted and what you can do about this. There are premium domain name servers that can be fast. I bet they're using premium because 40 milliseconds to resolve DNS, it's super fast. Then there is SSL connection. Most of us are using Let's Encrypt. It's free, right? Free and slow. So if your website is lean and tiny and it loads fast, this SSL long time from free SSL provider can be not that noticeable. But if your website is already heavy and also you have a free SSL that takes long time to load, it can be a problem. So here you can check these two main points, and then you have this wait time. This was BuzzFeed, and here is Franco Manco. So they have fast DNS as well. They have not that fast SSL certificate, and you can see here long wait time. Here it doesn't mean that their hosting is slow, because waiting time, it's everything. Performing requests in your database, sending information back. So the way the plugins that you use, the queries that those plugins are using, they all participate in this waiting time. What you can do, so you've tested a website here and you notice that waiting time is low. What you can do is trying to test not your home page, but robots.txt instead. It will show you the numbers for simple txt file without performing all PHP requests and sending requests to database. So if you have long numbers for robots.txt as well, these can indicate that something is wrong with your hosting provider. So I tested robots.txt for them as well. It wasn't that long. You see, like waiting time for PHP here is 443, and for robots.txt it's 200. It's like livable. It's not awful. So probably the problem is in their plugins and the way the theme is coded and stuff. So this is about changing your web host or upgrading your hosting plan. On your server, there could be like millions of ways why your website is slow. Like the best recommendation, if you're not sure if it's you, your website, or it's your host, what you can do, you can move your WordPress installation to another host. Luckily, all hostings have refund policy. You can move it there and test how fast it loads there. But just keep in mind that if you do this, you will skip these steps of resolving domain name and SSL certificate. But from other hand, you will have the picture of how your WordPress installation performs on different hosting. What else you can do is just ask your host why your website is slow. Sometimes this really can be resolved through the support. For example, it can be bot attack on your website and your CPU levels go high and your server is crashing. It truly can be something like this, and they might be able to help you with. Yeah, so for hosting, for example, like upgrading, and also just like a tiny note, there are millions of things that can go wrong there, right? And I just can't talk about all of them right now. But what you can do, try to run this byte check to see if it's DNS or it's SSL. Try to move your website to another host to see how it performs there. Try to ask your hosting for support. And also, if your website is still under construction or it has very, very little amount of visitors on your website, just keep in mind you don't need to update your hosting plan. I had clients just 2 weeks ago. They are hosted on Kinsta, they have nice hosting package, and they are still developing that website. There are no visitors, almost no visitors at all there, but website keeps crashing. So they upgraded some resources and did some optimization for their server, but it didn't help. But it couldn't have helped because those problems, they're not connected with upgrading hosting. If it keeps crashing, something is wrong, is definitely going wrong inside WordPress. It's not about hosting plan, it's not about hosting company. So if your website doesn't have like a huge amount of visitors, chances are that the problem is in plugins and scripts, how they interact with each other, how everything is done inside your WordPress installation, but not in your hosting company. So what is the whole point of this talk? I was thinking, how would I better describe the main idea? And I was thinking, like, imagine that you're participating in cooking contest. You can cook, and the winner will get $1 million. You can cook any meal you want, anything. It can be a soup, it can be meat, cake, cookies, or even cocktail. And you have all the ingredients in front of you in boxes. And they're all fresh, and they're super fresh, they're best quality, and you can pick any amount of any ingredient, and you can mix them in any way you would like to. And the important thing, your meal shouldn't be like the best in the world. It only should be eatable, but just it should be just eatable. So one person can have one or two servings at a time. So, and you also have an assistant who will do everything for you, cutting, peeling, everything, washing dishes. You won't even touch the food. So they're open for creativity. Actually, you're not allowed to touch the food or see what is in containers. So this is the terms of the content. You can cook whatever you want, but you cannot see what in containers. And everything like red hot chili peppers and salt and potato and sugar, everything will be in the same boxes. And you have to pick somehow and mix them together to make this meal possible to eat. This is a bit hard, right? So that's what we are trying to do when we're trying to apply like different advice to our website to improve website speed. It will be a little bit easier if we could see what's there in containers, right? What we can do. Before doing anything to our website, first we can test. We can go this way. First, test page loading time first, and test it a few times because there are fluctuations and it can be different with every single test. And look for some specific number. If it's largest contentful paint, then stick to that number and check this afterwards. If it's page speed, then it's page speed. So the second step will be change one thing at a time. So you checked what it's now, you changed one thing at a time, and then you retest, did it help or not, right? But when you're retesting, mind to make tests under the same conditions that you ran in the first test. It should be the same device, the same location. It should be the same page, obviously, and also few times because of these fluctuations. And then compare results and decide whether it helped or not. So this is the way you can go. But also, if you would like to become a chef and know more about your site speed, the best way will be to learn to read waterfall chart. This scary thing over here. It's not so scary, actually. So learning how to read waterfall chart can save you a lot of nerves and time with guessing game. So in most of the cases, you'll be able to just open the waterfall chart and read what's happening there and know immediately, oh, okay, this is scripts, oh no, this is images, or this is so and so. So yeah, this will be the way to become a chef. And I think that's it. There is a plugin on my plugin that helps you to monitor website speed. It runs tests daily and notify you in case your website speed got worse. And if you have any questions, please ask us here in live chat, or let me get back to this. Or you can ask me on Twitter or drop me a line. Yeah.
Wonderful, that's great. Thank you. Let me just take your slides off. I had, I think it's more of a statement, really. I think what is evident is the fact that there's a lot going on. You've got to concentrate on a lot. You've got to spin a few plates, right? Because you've got to weigh up the functionality and what you need and what you don't need. But I think probably the big sting is things like forms that load JavaScript everywhere on every single page. So you could just have your wits about you, I guess.
Actually, every form plugin has the ability to load their script only there where the form is present with hooks. You can do that. If you
Yeah.
have contact page, on some sites you have contact form on every page, right? But if you have contact page, it's pretty easy.
Yeah, I think from a development point of view, it's fairly easy for us to figure out where we're going to put. Even when I do my own plugins, I will check what screen I'm on before I load the script, because sometimes I just only want the script on one page. But
Yeah.
when it's a commercial plugin, the developer never knows where they're going to use or need that script, so it's just loaded everywhere, which is a bit annoying. But yeah, it is what it is. I think the takeaway is that you've just got to be aware of everything and be careful not to load stuff that you're not using, I guess. Anybody else got any questions they want to add to that? I do have a question from a viewer, if you don't. Okay, so Dave Fowler, this is unconnected to your talk, but he said that you mentioned in the intro that you never use Page Builder. Is that mainly due to page speed or another reason? I guess it's to do with your talk. But
Yeah, I
you'd
never
like
use
to
page to build. I never built websites for clients, like clients' websites. I used page builders on the websites that I were improving, where I was improving performance. So I saw them, I saw the documentation, but I never used them for myself.
Right. We've got one from, I think, a friend of yours, Hannah Smith. Do you know why combining files is still such a common recommendation? Even most hosting companies use HTTP2 now.
I don't know. Probably should be asked from those who are recommending that.
Yeah, true. Okay. Well, I think if anybody does have any questions, the only problem I had earlier was just I couldn't see the numbers on one of your slides, which was the showing the stats. But if you can share those slides with me, and I'll put them up on the Meetup page, then if anybody's got any questions, they can have a look and then come back to you.
Of course, I'll publish them right after our meetup, and I'll send you a link.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Sabrina. That was really interesting. And
can I just say something to add? Because I probably speak for a lot of people that you make it look all very easy, of course, and that's great. And you're very calm about it all. But actually, when you think about it, how complicated it is and can be, and for our for the business I work with for years, we do this whole speed optimization now for the site because it's such a complex site, and it's taking weeks and months and hours. So actually, the whole process can be very, very complicated if you go into the nitty-gritty of things. But it shouldn't be. That's the thing. It's we all online, we all using different browsers, and yet it can make such a big difference. So it's not a question, it's just sort of a general feel I think lots of people have. But thank you for maybe giving people more confidence to dive a little bit deeper and trying to understand it.
I strongly believe that not everything that can be fixed should be fixed. You're not aiming to be like the fastest website in the world. You just need to be not slow. And usually it's very, very usual that something that makes your website slow, it's like 2, 3, 4 main things, not everything. You don't need to fix everything in the world, and no need to be nervous and anxious about that. Just fix the main thing, be fine.
I think that's a great comfort for many people. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I think you can apply that to life in general, okay? You can't fix everything.
I want Stillman to come up with that. He just has these beautiful. Wait for it at the end of it. He's on it. I can see it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Sabrina. I'm going to say thank you on behalf of everybody. Thank you from wherever we are to you over in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Sorry it took me so long.
That's all right, no problem. And yeah, stay safe. So I'm going to drop everybody drop everybody out, and I'm going to move on to our next speaker, Jeremy. So,
Thanks, Elliot.
No worries. But before we do, I want to go through the. Obviously, we know. Well, I know. I've done my research. You're a coder, a professional leader. You like to coach people, but the thing I'm more interested in is how's your cooking going?
How's my cooking going?
Yeah.
Now, is this a reference to the to How to Code Well podcast?
Yes.
Oh dear. It's not going too badly. Working from home, I do actually get a bit more time to cook, although I'm very, very lucky. My wonderful fiance tends to cook on evenings, and I tend to cook at weekends. I'm not doing quite as adventurous as I'd like to be. For anybody who isn't aware, I was asked the question, if I wasn't coding and doing things like that in my spare time, what would I like to do? And my answer was to learn to cook from scratch from a lot of different cuisines from around the world. So not just your standard European fare, but stuff from South America, from Africa, from the Far East and places like that. Because I found through my limited travels around Europe, there are a lot of things that are the same in different cultures, but they've come by them by different ways, or they have different ways of doing things. And you can kind of see progression of certain food types and certain ways of cooking and things like that, and certain influences. And I find all of that sort of stuff fascinating. So it's not quite where I'd like it to be, but it is moving in the right direction.
Well, there's no rush. It's not a race, is it? So keep at it, and yeah, we share the same passion. So
yes,
that was one of the reasons I was interested. So, but yeah, again, just so that we can get to know you a little bit better, we'll do the quick fire this and that round. Are you ready?
Yep.
Right. So front end or back end?
Oh, definitely back end.
Mac or PC?
Used to be PC, but now it's a Mac.
You've got to pick one or the other.
In that case, I'm happy with Mac.
Oh, controversial. Cooking or coding?
Oh, that's a hard one. Cooking, because I get to eat the result.
Excellent. Indian or Thai?
Probably Thai. Thai has it for me.
Awesome. Flying or driving?
Flying, definitely.
Cool. As you can see, you can tell I've done my research. Right. Okay. Well, I'm gonna drop off, and I'm gonna let you introduce yourself and your talk. And again, thanks very much for joining us, and I hope to enjoy your show.
No problem at all. So, hello everybody. Thank you for having me to talk to you today. A very clever person that I used to work with, someone far cleverer than me, gave me some good advice on doing presentations. And it is, tell them what you're going to tell them it, and tell them what you told them. So that's kind of the format that I've stuck with pretty much. So it's going to be a similar thing for everybody tonight. So first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am, other than some of the stuff that Elliot has already mentioned. I'm going to start by then defining a few things about scalable hosting, about what Bedrock is. I won't try and define AWS because it's far too big. Going to talk about getting from A to B. So the whole point of the talk and what I'm going to go through is we're going to start with a single instance WordPress install on a single server, and then we're going to discuss how you take that and move it and migrate it into a large, scalable, high availability solution. And then I will wrap up and go over a few bits that I've talked about. So first of all, who is this bloke that's talking to you from the wilds of Cheltenham? So I'm the technical director at Torpedo Group, as I said before. This means that my remit is any of the technical stuff that goes on in the company. That's looking after the development teams, looking after our DevOps specialists, internal IT, anything like that kind of falls under my remit. Being a PHP developer for over 19 years now, so I remember before we even had classes back in the days of PHP 3 and 4. I've been programming for over 30 years. Started off on a ZX81, if anybody remembers those things. I have previously lived and worked in Germany as a developer, which was absolutely fantastic. That was over in Munich. Anybody gets the chance to work abroad, I thoroughly recommend it. And one of the things people don't necessarily know about me is I am a grandfather. I have two twins, twins, two girls. They're 4 years old now, and they are probably one of the main things in my life nowadays, probably my biggest hobby. So, first of all, we'll start off by defining what highly available and scalable hosting is. Now, the two things, they sound the same, but they are actually very different in terms of what they achieve and what the end goal is. So, scalable hosting is a hosting solution that is able to grow and shrink based on demand. So, if you have a website up and you, say, have a product launch, and all of a sudden you triple the amount of traffic going to that site, it may be that your normal solution would kind of max out and it would struggle to keep up with demand. If you have a scalable solution in place, then all that will happen is the capacity within the solution, normally the number of servers, will be increased to be able to cope with that demand, and then it would decrease back down again once that demand has gone down as well. So basically, the number of servers and the amount of resources available to the site shrinks and grows along with demand. If you're talking about highly available hosting, this is something that's quite different. What you're talking about here is having a solution where any part of the architecture could fail and the solution will still continue serving pages. So it could be that you have one of the routers go down, or you could have one of the web servers go down, or one of the databases in the cluster could go down, and the solution will still keep going because there is redundancy built into every single point. And this is the important distinction between the two solutions. They use similar architecture and they use a lot of the same components, but the end goal is very, very different. Like I said, scalable is to make sure that you cope with demand, increasing and decreasing, and the high availability is to make sure that the site does not fail if there is a component failure of any sort. Okay, some of you may have not come across Bedrock beforehand. It's the way it's the product we use to develop WordPress and the way we deploy it. So Bedrock, this is taken directly from the Roots.io Bedrock page. It is WordPress boilerplate with modern development tools, easier configuration. Yeah, I'll let you be the judge of that if you look into it, and an improved folder structure. So where they say modern development tools, Bedrock is a composer-driven boilerplate for WordPress. What this means is that within a composer file, if you use the composer, if you're not, it's a dependency manager for PHP libraries. But it means that you can specify things like the version of WordPress that you want to use, the version of any plugins that you want to do. You can lock them at specific versions as well. And when somebody else comes to try and build your site, or when you come to deploy the site, it will make sure it's always using exactly the same versions of the libraries that you have been developing with. The key thing for us with this is if we've got 2 or 3 developers working on a site, we can be sure that developer A, developer B, and developer C are all using the same version of a plugin. So nobody's going to be coding for a feature that isn't there yet. And we also get away from this. Well, it's working on my machine, so I don't know why it's not working in production. So that helps us deal with that issue that you sometimes get with development. It uses a more secure folder structure, and the way it does this is it actually has some of the files, the configuration files, outside of the web group, which means that it's harder for an attacker to get at them. It's not impossible, and if they're able to exploit your machine to, say, upload a file, then obviously a file could look outside the web root as well. But it adds an extra layer of security, which is always good practice. It follows the 12-factor app methodology. Again, if you've not heard of this and you're a developer it's well worth going away to the website and having a read. The whole point of what 12-factor tries to achieve is that it tries to segregate code in environment. So you should be able to write your code once and then run it on your dev box, run it on your staging sites, run it on QA, production, and any other sites you need to without having to change the code. And likewise, if there's a change in environment, like a database changes or you change the passwords, you shouldn't need to change your code repo and republish. You should be able to just make the changes within that environment and it will be picked up. Final reason is we like it. I'll be honest, it's a system I inherited from my predecessor at the company, but for all the reasons I've already mentioned and loads more that I could wax lyrical on for quite a while, it's a system that works really well. It works with our automated deployment. It works very well with the way we do the scalable solutions. It just does a really good job. So I would definitely recommend checking out Bedrock and Trellis as well, which is an automated deployment version of Bedrock that can be used with various systems. So, but now to get on to the meat of the talk. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with this very, very simple diagram of what would be a bog standard normal WordPress install for most people. And we're going to take this all the way through to a high availability system and explain the steps and why we have to do what we do and what that means for the solution we're looking at. So I'm sure most of you should be familiar with this, the idea of this kind of scenario. These are AWS specific. It's pretty much the same on any other cloud system you want to use. A VPC is just your virtual area within the cloud. So that's an area within, in the case of this, AWS's data center that you're using. And then you have a public subnet. So that means that you've got a subnet for your servers that is public facing. Your users over here will come in via the internet gateway. They'll talk to your WordPress box. Your WordPress is probably a LAMP stack. So it's probably got Linux, PHP, MySQL running, and your contacts, the user will contact the web server. The web server will serve up the page back to the user. Simple as that. So this is not a very highly available solution, because if this web server were to die, you'd have no website. It would be gone. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to swap out the web server, and we're going to create a cluster of web servers. So in the case of this diagram, we've effectively got 3 servers, and these are 3 servers that are all serving up the same WordPress site. They could be serving up anything. Obviously, we're concentrating on WordPress and Bedrock here. So what happens is the user comes in via the gateway, hits one of your servers, and that then sends the page back. Now, this is all well and good, because if this server were to die, these 2 are available, but the only way that you're going to hit any of these is either by using a different URL or IP, or trying to do something a bit clever with DNS so that it will maybe present a different IP to every third client that connects, and therefore you kind of spread the load. But if this one were to disappear, all the people that have got this IP address cache, they wouldn't be able to hit your site anymore. So to get around this, the second thing we introduce is a load balancer. So this makes 2 quite important changes to the architecture already, and we're only adding the second component. The first change is that we now have 2 separate subnets. So the way the architecture for this is arranged is anything that the public should be able to talk to will live in a public subnet. Anything that we can possibly hide from the general public on the internet will go into a private subnet. And so what we're doing here in the journey of a request is user types in your URL, that gets fed through into the load balancer. The load balancer says, I know where that site is, and it will then direct the traffic to one of these free servers, and normally it will distribute the traffic based on either whoever is least busy, or it could be just a round robin. So it'll do this one, and this one, and this one, then this one, this one, this one. It could be random. There's quite a few different ways of doing it. The important thing is that the load balancer will try and evenly distribute the load across all three of these. And if one of these were to disappear, it would then just distribute the load over two of them. So the load balancer is the only thing that the public need to talk to, because that does the talking to the web service for you. Another advantage of doing this is we can terminate our SSL connection at the load balancer end, so that we don't have to worry about setting up certificates and maintaining certificates on the web service, because this here, this traffic here is all contained within the VPC. It's not seen by the public internet, so it's completely secure within this area. The other thing about the load balancer and about a lot of the AWS services that we'll talk about tonight is this is actually highly available and scalable by default. A lot of the stuff that AWS do and other cloud providers do this as well. I'm specifically talking about AWS because I know the infrastructure. A lot of the services they do are automatically scalable and highly available. So this load balancer is actually made up of a number of machines spread across a number of data centers within a region. If you take the London region as an example, because I love this little tidbit about this region, it's comprised of 3 data centers, one in North London, one in South London, and one in South Wales. London's getting bigger all the time. But what it means is they could lose an entire data center in North London, and the load balancer nodes in South London and in South Wales will then pick up the load. So you can lose an entire data center and you won't lose your solution. And the same for the servers here. So this could be in North London, this could be in South London, and this could be in South Wales. So if North London went offline, you still have South London and South Wales. So the availability of these free web servers is also at a high level. Now, the first problem we have with this solution is we can get information in. People can talk to the load balancer, they can talk to the web servers, that can send the information back out. However, these web servers themselves, because they're in this private subnet, they can't actually talk to the public internet at large. So if I wanted to install a new PHP module, update the OS on there, or install a patch, or do anything like that, I can't easily do that unless I were to download the patch and manually upload it myself and install it. So I wouldn't be able to say use apt-get. So the way we get around this, and this is something that you will all be familiar with even if you don't realize it, is we put in a network address translation gateway, or for those of us that aren't that technical, a router. So what this box does, which is again in the public internet, this just acts like your broadband router, Wi-Fi router, whatever you've got at home, in that anything this side of it, i.e. the web servers, are able to make a connection going out to talk to, say, a website. In our example, it would probably be Ubuntu's update servers to pull down patches, but traffic from the external internet cannot get back through that NAT gateway unless it's information that was requested by the web servers. So this still maintains our high level of security here, but it does mean that our web servers have a route out to talk to update servers, or, which is quite often the case with a lot of the stuff we do, talk to marketing automation systems like Salesforce or Pipedrive, or possibly payment provider systems as well, if you have something that, that needs to connect directly to their service. One of the other nice things about having the NAT gateway in situ is this presents as a single IP, much like your home broadband router will. So for example, if you were to connect to Google on your phone and type in what's my IP, and do the same from a computer or any other device, it will be the same IP address. The same is the case here, which means that we only need to whitelist one IP with any of our service providers if they provide a whitelist for connection, and any of these servers will end up picking up that IP. So even if we ended up swapping out all of these servers, we wouldn't have to resubmit IPs to the whitelist. It would always be the same one on that gateway. So that's taken us to the point where we've kind of got a nice communication channel going on. So now we start to hit our first problem with WordPress itself. So if I'm a WordPress user, administrator, I log in to the control panel at the back end, and I make an update to the content. What's going to happen is, if the load balancer has assigned me to this server here, I'm going to make a content update, and that's going to be stored in the database. Unfortunately, as it stands, the database is on this server. So if the next person coming in requests the page I've just updated, and they hit this server, they aren't going to see the changes, because the changes are specific to this database. And although they're in the same private subnet, they don't talk to each other. It's much like Christmas dinner. You've got them all around the table, but no, because of what Auntie Gertie said last year, no one's talking. So the way we get around this is we add yet another layer of complexity to our diagram, and we introduce a database that is then used by all of these web servers to store content. So what happens now is that we pass through the load balancer, we hit this server, for instance, we make an update to our content, which gets written to the database over here. The next person coming in hits the load balancer, they may hit this server here. That's also using this database to store content. So it pulls back the content from there and serves it up. So all the web servers know exactly what the content looks like, and they're all well aware of any changes that have been made. Doing this, we also introduce another layer of security with an additional private subnet. And this means that we can even more tightly control who has access to this database, and we provide it only to these servers here. If you had a solution where you had another level of middleware, you might actually add an additional private subnet in here, go through the middleware, and then go through the go to the database. Generally, we don't need to do that, particularly not with WordPress. There's only one instance where I've done anything like that for a specific case. So normally, you would just have the single database there. Because this is a Amazon service, it's highly available and scalable as well. It's automatically built, I believe, with 1 primary and 2 secondary replicas, again, across all the data centers that are within that region. And therefore, if one of those goes down, the other one can then pick up and take up the load, and then it will rebuild itself and bring itself back up to the normal number of databases. Again, keeping things as highly available as possible. So at the moment, we've got somewhere to store our content, we've got a way for the servers to communicate out, and we've got a way for people to access the site. The next issue is similar to the problem with content, but it's to do with assets. But it's exactly the same scenario. I'm administering my WordPress site. I'm uploading a new graphic or a PDF or some other asset to the web server, and we get the same scenario. I'm hit this server here. I upload the asset that's stored in the local file system. Unfortunately, the next person in who would want to download that asset hits this server or this server, and it doesn't see it. Now, these WordPress instances know it's there because the reference to it is stored in the database, but it's not actually on the file system. So it's going to get a bit messy. So the next item that we introduce is something called Elastic File System. So Elastic File System, EFS, that is just a network available drive that you can then connect into the web servers. So the way we do this is that within AWS, we set a build script for each server within a solution. which will do things like install PHP, install Apache, configure a few things. And one of the things that we do as part of that is we mount the EFS drive as a network share directly onto the servers. So all of the 3 of these servers just see this as another drive, and therefore we're able to point that to uploads, for instance, and that will allow all of the servers to store their files here and pull them from there when they're serving up requests. The other advantage of doing it this way, because we have looked at doing that with an S3 bucket using a plugin, but the other advantage we've got here is one more problem you have when you have separate servers that are completely separate commodity boxes. That's sessions. So if you're storing anything in the server-side session store, then those are normally, depending on how things are set up, stored into the temp file on that server. But again, if I come in and I'm on this server and I'm in the middle of shopping, say, and the basket uses sessions, if this server were to die off, then I would end up hitting either this or this server, but I would lose my basket, which could be very frustrating, particularly if this happens often. You shouldn't do, but there is always the chance that something's going to go wrong. So you have got the option of storing your sessions in the database, or you have the option of storing sessions and basically reporting PHP sessions to store in the EFS. We go with that version because we find that that seems to work better from experience. It's only anecdotal. I don't have any hard figures to back that up, but our feeling if you're doing this is that everything feels like it works slightly better when you do your sessions directly in the EFS. So now we have a system where all of these web servers are able to read the same content, read the same files, they're able to talk to the outside world, and they're able to receive and respond to requests from the public at large. So at this point, we now have what would be considered a highly available solution. We can tell by just tracking through all the items. So the load balancer, if we lost a data center, we've got 2 other data centers worth of load balancer that will pick it up. It's the same with the web servers. It's the same with the database. It's the same with all the files. WordPress, the only content that we need to, or the only items we need to worry about being available to all the servers is the WordPress database, which obviously content is normally stored in there among other things, and any assets that are there. And our servers can talk to the outside world. And I guess, again, the NAT gateway is highly available. Although out of all these items here, that's the one we can live without if it was gone for, say, an hour, because our web servers don't necessarily always have to talk. If it was required for, say, payments or for lead or marketing automation systems or things like that, then obviously we would need to be sure that that's got enough coverage. But that's probably the one that's the least of a worry for most of these solutions. However, this is not yet a scalable solution. So as it stands at the moment, if we had a sudden spike in traffic, this would grow to cope, this would grow to cope, as would this, because they're all handled by AWS as part of the service. These, however, would not be able to cope. If we overloaded these servers, then we would be they would start not responding to requests, and we would start losing traffic. The way we can turn this into a proper scalable solution is with almost the final component that we'll be adding to this diagram, and that's something called an auto-scaling group. So what the auto-scaling group does is it's actually a monitor that's built into the AWS ecosystem. And what this does is this will watch these servers for certain key metrics. The main metrics you're going to normally check are, is the website responding with a valid code? So in the case of using WordPress, quite often you're going to be looking for a 200, a 301, or a 401. The 200 is obviously a normal, yes, everything's fine. 301 is a redirect, and this is because if you're hitting it, if it's hitting it as the IP address, WordPress is going to say, hang on a minute, mate, you have to come via the URL. So it may respond to the monitor with the 301 saying, look, can you go to the actual URL, please, so that I can know what you're talking about and I can serve up the request. And then a 401 is another one that we have to add, because if it's a staging site, quite often we'll put in a HD access password. That will respond with a 401, not authorized, but that is a valid response to show that the server is alive and doing what it should do. The other things that you will probably monitor with the auto-scaling group are going to be CPU and memory usage. So an example, a normal example we would use is we would set an upper threshold of 60%. So the rule would basically say, if all of the servers within this group are above 60% for a couple of minutes, add in another server until the load goes below 60%. You can set an upper cap on that as well. So you can say, don't spin up more than 10 servers, say, because obviously you don't want to get hit by a DDoS attack and suddenly find that you're paying for 2,000 servers because your auto-scaling group did its job. The flip side of that is you will also set a lower limit of, say, 30% CPU usage, and you would have a rule that says, if my servers drop below 30% usage for a couple of minutes, then please start reducing the number of servers down to a minimum. And normally you would have a minimum of 2, so that you maintain a highly available solution, so that if one of those servers died, you've got the other one there always running, ready to take up the load. And then the auto-scaling group will actually say, hang on, you're down to 1 server because that one's dead. Let's build you up another one, and it will keep it as 2. You can do the same for memory and everything else. So this now gives us a solution where every part of it, there is no single point of failure, and every part is able to scale up and scale down to meet with demand. So if we had product launch and it went particularly well, I don't know, say we're doing a new pizza with pineapple on, just to keep it topical, and everybody's suddenly hitting the site because they all want this pizza with pineapple on, then the auto-scaling group would allow our web servers to build out so that it can deal with the load. Now, the one thing we have left to consider, and the other design thing you have to consider when you're doing this type of solution, is these web servers are commodity items. You can expect these to disappear. Yeah, pineapple on pizza, I'm a fan. I've upset a few people now, I can tell. You have to view these web servers as commodity boxes where they could just disappear at a second's notice and be rebuilt. Now, the problem is, if you're developing a complex WordPress site, then you're going to have specific plugins, specific themes that you're using. You're going to have possibly some other code, that you might have some other PHP libraries that you're using. Those things aren't stored within the database, and they certainly shouldn't be stored on the EFS storage. So the way we get around that, I alluded to part of that earlier when I said that the web servers all have their own built-in build scripts. So the built-in build script will set up a server with a LAMP stack and any plugins, or sorry, any PHP libraries that we're using. We now actually build that out using FPM for PHP, PHP 7.4, FPM, and Apache. But we also need to be able to get the code on there. And most importantly, we need the auto-scaling group to understand how to get the code on there, because it's going to be adding stuff in. It's no good if the servers reach their upper limit of 60%, and then somebody has to then log on to the console and decide to, and then build a server to add back in, add into that solution so that it can expand out. It all has to be automated. So we have to have a very automated deployment process. And this is where we find that Bedrock works particularly well. So in order to achieve this, And this is the last part of the diagram. I promise it doesn't get any more complicated than this now. So this is the part of the solution that takes care of that. So we use a Amazon service called Code Deploy. And what Code Deploy does is it will take a source code, zip, effectively, zip file, and it will then, by an agent, install this onto the web servers as they get built by the autoscaling group, or if a build is triggered by a developer who wants to release new versions of code to these web servers. Code Deploy uses a specification file within the repo to state what steps it has to take in order to deploy it. So this is where you tell it how you deploy it, where am I moving the source code to, what scripts am I running, where, and there are a number of lifecycle hooks that are available within the Code Deploy ecosystem that you can hook into. So you can have certain scripts that trigger when you download the code or before you do the install. So stopping Apache is one of the ones we use after you've installed the code. So this is where we would reconfigure some of the configuration files and restart Apache. So that's the first part of this process. And when we deploy, so when we do a deployment, we push the repo up to an S3 bucket where it's stored there, and then Code Deploy then knows, right, I grab the code from the S3 bucket and I then build out onto the servers that I'm doing. Now, the other thing that I mentioned way back at the beginning, if you remember, is that one of the other great things about Bedrock is it follows the 12-factor app. And I said one of the key things that's to do is to try and separate environment from code. And the way it does this is a lot of the stuff you would normally put in your WP config file, it actually can read from either an environment file, so .env file that's on your server, it's outside of the document root, so it's not readable by the web server, only by PHP itself. Or, and this is what we use, you can actually have it as part of the Apache config as Apache environment variables, and it understands to pull those out and put them into the right place so that you can store your database, database username, password, your WP home, which is obviously quite important, and various other bits and pieces that you might need for a functioning site. Your salts would go in there as well. The way we utilize this is we use this little service down here called Parameter Store. Now, this is another AWS service. Again, there are similar services available on the other cloud providers, so it's not specific to AWS. But Parameter Store is a secure key store password, key store database, effectively. So it will store a key, and we have a specific structure to our key, and then it will store the information, which can be stored encrypted with a key within AWS, so that you have to have permission to decrypt it to be able to see the data. And those permissions can be at a service level as well. So it could be that we allow some web servers to have access to decrypt it and not others, so that we can keep information very secure between different solutions. The way we structure the keys is we have a base, so it's almost like a directory structure. So every key starts with deployments, so that we know that these are deployment key pairs and not something else, not a different parameter. We then have the application that it belongs to. So normally we'd use the website name. So for example, it might be torpedogroup.com. Need to make sure I'm on brand. And then we would put down the environment that it is. So whether it's production, staging, possibly development. And then finally, what the key is for. So database user, WP home, auth login, salt, or any of the other things that we need to set up. What we then do is within the autoscaling group, as we build out one of these servers, we tag it with certain information as well. So a server will be tagged with an application, which would be, for example, torpedogroup.com, and it will be tagged with an environment. So it could be staging, or it could be production, or another environment, depends what we've done. What Code Deploy can then do is it can interrogate the server itself and say, okay, what are my tags? Okay, I can see my application is torpedogroup.com. I can see that my environment is staging. So when I go and look in the parameter store, I know I'm looking for deployment, torpedogroup.com, staging, database user, and then I insert that into the vhost file so that it doesn't matter where we deploy this code to, it knows where to get its information so it can configure itself properly to be able to run on the web servers. And again, like I said, this is because every part of the solution you have to treat as disposable. Those web servers could disappear like that. Someone could pull the plug on, say, the South London data center, and we could lose all the servers that were in there. And therefore, we need to be able to bring them back online in other ones, or, like I said, suddenly, everybody goes mad for pizza with pineapple, and therefore we're getting hammered with a load of traffic because everybody wants to get it from us. So that kind of is pretty much everything there is to do with the highly available, scalable solution. Like I said, everything on this diagram, to be fair, including this area here, is highly available, particularly with auto-scaling groups in, and it's also scalable. These all scaled automatically, and this is something that's controlled by us. The nice thing about putting things into an auto-scaling group, just as a little aside, is if you are only going for a highly available solution, and I mentioned this just now, if you tell the auto-scaling group you always want 2 servers, because you're only ever going to need 2 servers, you don't want to worry about scaling up and down, it's still worth setting that up within an auto-scaling group, because if one of those servers goes offline for some reason, kernel panic, or there's a database query that fails on there and it just wipes out the CPU, the auto-scaling group is monitoring it. It will detect a problem. It will then kill off that server and replace it with a new one. And again, pulling in all the stuff from Code Deploy so that it is a new server that can pick up the load and you can carry on working. And all the time, the other server is just everything from the load balancer switched to the other server. So that's picking up the load. So that's a lot of talking from me. So give you a little bit of overview of who I am. That's just because I'm egotistical. You didn't really need to know that. We went over a very brief description of what highly available and scalable hosting are. Remember, they are similar, but they are not the same, because the goal of each of them is a different thing. Scalable hosting is literally scale out, contract, and highly available is just no single point of failure. But as you've seen, they use a lot of the same architecture, a lot of the same components, and we built up the architecture from starting with a small single server, to B, which is a much bigger platform that can cope with pretty much anything you throw at it. So, any questions?
I'll wait for it. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, I'll wait for people to throw in their questions, but in the meantime, I have a couple of questions anyway. I'm going to bring everybody else in.
Yep, I got lots of questions.
Yeah. So I mean, this isn't like your traditional managed hosting setup where you would rely on your managed service and offload any of the issues you've got to them.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of security and responsibilities regarding your clients and data breaches and stuff like that obviously puts a lot of pressure on you, because you're delivering that service, you're setting it up. I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, and how you maybe perhaps deal with that and relay that to your clients.
Yeah, so we AWS do have a very specific responsibility model in terms of who's responsible for which part. So things like the load balancer, the database, the responsibility for keeping most of that secure rests with AWS. But obviously, because we have control of routing tables, public IPs and things like that, there is a level of responsibility for us as well. We are, I've got a very talented team. I'm very lucky to have them, which is a massive bonus. But we always build these up from first principles with security in mind, which is why, for example, the web servers are in a private subnet and can only be reached by the load balancer. So that straight away stops all traffic except any traffic on port 80 hitting those servers. And like I said, we terminate SSL at the load balancer. So up to the load balancer is 443. And then from that point on, it is port 80, but all within a dedicated area that the public cannot get to. So that's the first thing we do. We make sure we have a patching regime. Luckily, because we use things like Aurora and EFS, that's all patched by AWS themselves. So they make sure that those servers are kept up to date. Aurora is their own product, although it is MySQL compatible, which is why we use it. And there are other tools within AWS. There's Inspector. There are tools that can scan your servers and warn you of any CVs that may be for any of the stuff that's on there. So there is a lot of additional stuff you can do around the compliance piece. The other advantage is that AWS are SOC 2 compliant, PCI compliant. So in terms of the actual hardware infrastructure and their data centers, that's all covered off. It's only if we really screw up on our permissions, like leaving an open bucket with data in, that we have a problem. And we are very careful to not, or to try to minimize exposure. So we try not to have any GDPR data on our any of our sites unless we absolutely have to, hence talking to marketing automation systems. So we'll get a lead in, we'll try and push that straight through to something like Salesforce or HubSpot or somewhere, so that we're not actually holding that data ourselves. But yeah, you do have to be very, very mindful of what you're doing. You do need to make sure you understand what's going on. There is a wealth of information out there, and AWS themselves generally tend to be very good at giving you help, advice, and pointers if you need it. So, yeah.
So I guess the biggest takeaway is that if anybody wanted to do this, they just need to be very aware of what they're getting into, and to mitigate any one of the those kind of hoops you need to go through.
Yeah.
The other, I mean, presumably when you set that complex system up, that's literally for one site, right?
Yes, it can be for one site, although there is the possibility to share parts of the infrastructure. So I didn't want to overcomplicate the diagram, but you can have a number of different auto-scaling groups within that middle section that are talking to the same database. So for example, for one client, we will have the production site and the staging site all within the same architecture. In two different scaling groups. We have another client where we have, I believe it's 8 sites currently within that type of architecture. So the database is shared, the file store is shared between all of those. However, each production and staging site is its own separate individual auto-scaling group. And obviously they then have their own code deployed. It's associated with that. So when, like I said, when we push code, it will automatically go to the right servers and it understands it.
So the scary thing is if you put the wrong command in, is you take down the live and
yes, or if something changes, which occasionally does happen, if something changes, then it can cause deployments to fail. So yes, we have to be very careful and understand what's going on as well.
Cool, that's great. Anybody got any? Well, Rich, you've got some questions, I think.
Got a couple of questions. I think you've covered most. Is this something you offer to all clients, or for kind of smaller clients would you not recommend it? Would you say it's for certain clients, or?
So kind of do almost a bit of a plug. We actually pushed out a blog post on this yesterday that I wrote, talking about the difference between that solution and your traditional hosting. I would say that we would always offer this as an option to a client if they were interested. I would say you only really want to investigate this at the moment if you have either a you're going to lose money if your site's down. So if you're running an e-commerce and that hour of downtime is going to cost you X amount of pounds, it's definitely something you should consider. The other one is reputational damage. So if you are seen as a tech leader, having your site offline for a couple of hours because one of your servers has gone down is probably not going to send the right message to the clientele that you're trying to attract, and therefore you might consider this as an option. It isn't cheap.
But that was going to be my other question. Is it for that diagram that you showed? Could you give like a rough idea of cost? Obviously, depending on how much it scales, doesn't it? So,
so the ironically enough, one of the bigger parts of that is going to be somewhere around bandwidth usage. It is expensive. It's never going to compete with say 123reg or Fasthost or WP Engine or someone like that. Yeah. However, the cost for something like that, where you've got on average two web servers running for your production and one for your staging, and the rest of the solution that I've got in there, you're probably looking at about $250 a month.
It's not too bad, is it?
So it is a fair whack, but it's not the thousands that it used to be for this solution. And this is the key thing with AWS and Azure and Google Cloud and some of the other cloud providers now, because it's commodity hardware. It has come down a lot in price. We were looking at we're judging the cost of setting up an additional server for one of the clients, because we were doing some testing around different configurations for Apache and speed testing and things like that. And we were looking at a couple of dollars for the month to get an additional server itself set up. Yeah. Because a lot of the cost is with some of the other infrastructure. And obviously, if you can share infrastructure, then that's good. But if for security reasons you might not be able to, some clients can have, they will have 5 or 6 different sites, so they can then share back-end database, they can share the file store, they can share the load balancer, which helps bring costs down a little bit. But yeah, about $250 a month is something for a reasonable setup with a reasonable amount of traffic, I would say.
So my final question, I think I could keep it that, is in terms of backups. Do you still need backups?
Yes.
Or is that kind of an extra thing that you need to consider? Is that because that wasn't part of your diagram, was it? Or was...
No, it wasn't. Again, mainly to leave them out. All the services have backup facilities, and I would always take backups as well, because it's not just from a component failure or something like that you require the backups. You've got ransomware attacks. If somebody manages to get in and somehow deface the content in the database, or you get assets uploaded that you don't want, or you accidentally delete an asset that you do want, you're going to want backups for those reasons. It's not so much of I need backups because the solution, the server might disappear. Mm-hmm. It's designed with that in mind, but there are other reasons why you'd want to keep backups. So
you can get through Amazon as like another feature sets that you add onto it, and then you
can do it that way. For some things, we do use Amazon's own backup facilities. The Aurora DB, it creates a snapshot every day anyway, and then you've got the log transactions that you can back up to point in time. EFS, we would normally back up, normally to an S3 bucket, to be perfectly honest with you. But you can also do your own. So there are a couple of sites where we actually create a backup of the database and the assets, and we pull them down to a local store within the office, because that's something it's a bit legacy, but it's something that we've agreed. So. Yeah. You've got control, you can do what you want, but yeah, you do want to do backups, definitely.
Cool. keep it that. I could keep asking questions, but yeah, keep it like that.
No problem.
Anybody else got any questions? Rob,
No questions at all. I appreciated it very much because I've always heard the words and now I know what they all mean.
It was a good talk. I really enjoyed it. Amazon's something I've only used S3 buckets before, and I see all the tools. And like, when people hear people talk about it, and it's something that I've never really looked into, but your talk kind of makes it look approachable. Maybe it probably looks easy on paper, but until I start trying to do it, that's where the fun will start. But
if you start and you do it bit by bit, it's not too bad. But Amazon, I am an Amazon fanboy. I will admit that straight away because I don't know another cloud provider that will provide you a ground station to talk to your satellites. And we all need to have our satellites spoken to.
Yeah,
that's the point. But there's a lot in there, but there's also a lot of information out there that will help you do this. And there are some cloud formation templates. Something I didn't mention during the talk, but one of the things you can do with Amazon is you can actually build up your infrastructure as a series of JSON files. So it's infrastructure as code is what they call it. And you can get, if you search online, you can find a lot of these templates for high availability systems that you can then download, install into an account and have a look and see how it works. There's also a tool they have where you can load it into a viewer and it will show you the diagram of what it intends to build, and you can then see from that how these things hang together. So there's a wealth of information out there. And you don't necessarily need to do any of the certification courses to understand it.
I think a visual reference to something like that is what makes it super useful.
Yeah.
So just to finalise then, if anybody wanted to dip into AWS, because it's got a whole plethora of stuff on there that I've looked at it and it just overwhelms me. Where would you recommend that they start just to dip their toes?
To start and dip your toes, just create an account. There is a lot of stuff you can use for free. EC2 is their version of a virtual machine. So you have that, but there are a lot of, when you log into the console, there are some tutorials that will take you through step by step how to do certain things. And also, it will normally be within the free tier. So you can try these things out and it's not going to cost you a penny to begin with. And some of the free tier stuff is for good. So they have something called Lambda, which is this serverless function computing that everybody keeps raving about. That's free for life up to a certain level. So if you're doing some low-grade stuff with Node, then you can have it running a cloud environment, and it's not going to cost you anything unless you go over the threshold. If you're looking at EC2 instances, they are free for about a year for certain instance types. So you can just get in, dip your toe in, get it wet, and see how you feel about it.
Okay, cool. So you could take it quite far, really, with the free. Yeah. With a production site, I guess. With maybe you want to test something out for a particular client, you could test it for a year and then switch, and then
you certainly could
start expanding on that. Yeah.
And if you wanted to just get a site across the cloud rather than hosting it, they do something called Lightsail, which is a kind of a pre-built virtual machine in a box with a set price. And they start at something like $3 a month. And there is a WordPress specific image that they have. So you literally could spin up a WordPress instance or a Plesk instance if you prefer for $3 a month. And that would run quite a few, a small to medium sized site quite easily. And again, it's an easy in and it's all looked after for you. And you can start adding things onto that if you wanted to as well.
Brilliant. Well, I don't have any more questions. I don't think anybody else has. I think that was a super interesting. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Definitely an insightful talk for people to get their feet wet in, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, all it remains for me to say, I guess, we come to at the end of the kind of talks is we'd sort of usually drop in some news, but there's nothing really going on at the moment. All the big things have happened. If there's anything that anybody needs to add or would like to add, same for you, Jeremy, if you want to promote anything.
Well, there was the blog post, like I said, which has an interesting demonstration with tennis balls about how scalability and high availability works. So if anybody's
you did share, yeah, you did share that with me, but I didn't actually see the link in the.
let me
tweet.
let me see if I can just grab the link for you. Yeah, it's quite possible. Sometimes.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'll pop that out on our in the Meetup group and also on our Twitter account.
Yeah. So cool. Yeah, that gives a basic overview of some of the stuff I talked about, but that's more based on what are they and what's the difference and why would you use them. So, and like I said, quite an interesting way of demonstrating high availability and scalability from a talk I did internally.
Cool, good stuff. Okay, if anybody has anything else to add, we could you can add them, or should we wrap up?
Got nothing else to add, I don't think.
Cool. Well, thank you, Stillman, for joining us. And
well,
thank you, Richard, for joining us. Thank you, Ronald.
Thank you.
And thank you to both of our speakers, especially Sabrina. She's actually dropped off, but I think it was getting late over there. So
yeah.
But yeah, equally to you, Jeremy, as well, because it's always really difficult to get speakers in person. It's made it slightly easier in the virtual world, but you know, I always appreciate, and I'm sure I speak for everybody, always appreciate the time that people put into it, because it's always, there's a lot of effort that goes into talks and goes on behind the scenes. So yeah, thank you very much.
It was my pleasure.
Great stuff. And love to see you in person as well when we all get back together, hopefully at some point.
Well, now we're remote working, I'll be in Cheltenham a lot earlier, so I will when you restart the physical meetups, I will definitely be attending.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what Boris Johnson says on that.
Pressure.
we look forward to that.
Yeah, cool. All right, okay. Thank you, chaps. I'm going to
Bye for now.
end the broadcast.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
See you later.
See you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.